Today on Education Forum, Autism Hope Center, a discussion with Dr. Robert Babcock. From the studio in the College of Education and Health Professions, high atop Jordan Hall at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, this is Education Forum with your host, Dr. Jeffrey Conklin. Hi, welcome to Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. On our very first Education Forum, we had on Dr. Janine Fittipaldi-Wirt, and we discussed autism. We thought we'd close out this season with another discussion on autism with a new guest. We have with us today Dr. Robert Babcock, who's the clinical director of the Muskogee County Autism Support Group and the Autism Hope Center. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Jeff.
And also with me today is my co-host, Dr. Greg Blaylock, who is an associate professor of special education here at Columbus State University. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, with that being said, let's start out our discussion. Bob, can you tell us about the Muskogee County Autism Support Group?
Sure. The Muskogee County Autism Support Group is a group that was formed, now 3 or 4 years ago by parents who recognized a tremendous need for services and also for support and education for persons that have autism spectrum disorders, as well as for their families, for community providers, and for physicians in the local Columbus, Chattahoochee Valley area.
Okay.
And so the group started meeting and pulling together resources and formed a nonprofit organization that established the Autism Hope Center as a preschool program and a training program to try to reach the lives of families and kids with autism by providing a model demonstration program for a small number of kids, as well as to serve as a training site for students in the professions in the local area, and also for people who are in the community who want to know more about how to do early intervention with autism.
Okay, but why the Autism Hope Center? Why?
Why? Well, because families wrestling with autism spectrum disorders really need to have a sense that there's some hope that things can and will get better.
Okay.
And we have a tremendous amount of technology that's available today that kids with autism don't often have access to. And I think it really is that technology that provides the hope.
Okay.
We're seeing that about 1% of the population at this point is diagnosable as being somewhere on the autism spectrum. And probably the best study on this comes from Lancet, where they looked in the South Thames area of London, and they looked at a full population of 59,000 8 to 9-year-olds. They found that 1 in 86 kids was on the spectrum when you look closely.
Yes.
And so that number of about 1% is about right.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that there's a tremendous unserved need out there. And kids that are on the spectrum end up as adults who are on the spectrum who don't have the abilities in the course of the fullness of their life that they could have if they received research-based effective intervention early on,
okay,
as well as throughout their developmental time frame. So really the hope here is in the application of methods that we have that are available through a research that work well, not perfectly, but that work well, but that most folks don't have adequate access to.
Okay.
Isn't this similar to what we do in the public schools, or is this something that we do in addition to public school?
Well, I think one of the things that is most striking to me is that if you look at the developmental time course of autism, this disorder actually starts in the first year of life.
Okay.
And the brain is changing and very, very fluid in the first 3 years of development. And so the sooner you get into intervention the better prognosis you have. And by the time you're in public school, meaning beginning with kindergarten, it's way too late to begin to have the kind of impact that you could have had if you were starting at 2-3 years of age, even earlier. The thing about public school programs is that they tend not to be at the level of intensity that you really need to have.
So the Hope Center provides early intervention services, so to speak, for kids.
That is a huge part of our mission. We actually have, at this point, a fourfold mission. A core of it is early intervention. Okay. A related piece to that is training for professionals to get early diagnosis occurring, because the sooner the diagnosis is done, the more accurately it's done, the better the chances of getting intervention in early enough to make the most good.
Now, when you say professionals, who are you referring to?
We're talking physicians. We're talking about early intervention outreach professionals. Okay. We're talking about, we do a tremendous amount of in-service training across a broad number of groups. For example, we're also training paramedics and fire personnel and police right now who interface with adults and kids out in the community. That's a tremendous need. We offer monthly training as well to parents and professionals who want to attend. We have teachers that come to our training, psychologists, social workers, a variety of practitioners, and as well as parents every month. And there we focus on issues that range from, how you handle homework issues with kids to how you manage behavior problems, to prevent behavior problems from developing, to communication strategies, to toilet training. There's just a huge number of needs. So our training mission is really fairly broad, but one of the core pieces of it is to use the early intervention program to demonstrate skills that people, for example, we have students at Columbus Tech who are in the dental program. Who come over and participate in our preschool and learn how to work with kids in autism, so that if they're then working as a dental hygienist down the road and they have a patient with autism, they have a really good sense of, at least they've worked with some kids who have the disability and they have a good sense
understand it a bit.
Little bit.
And we also do hands-on training with students in psychology, special education from the local universities. You guys, I think, have had a little bit to do with us.
Good.
And we try to provide a place where folks can learn a variety of hands-on skills, not just reading about it in a textbook, not just hearing about it in a lecture, but being able to come in and work with some highly qualified instructors and learn how to actually provide some services to kids hands-on.
Sure. Now, when so
part of our mission.
So getting back to the services, you provide early intervention services. We're not just talking 3 to 5-year-olds. We're talking birth to 3 as well.
Well,
is that correct?
That is correct, and we're available to. Our preschool starts with kids that are about 2.5 at this point, but we're available to try to help families do things earlier in home. And so, absolutely, oftentimes getting children diagnosed early enough to do that is the challenge.
So, kids are typically diagnosed after their second birthday.
Yeah, and often kids go to a physician, and I think this is improving. But when I was up at Emory a few years ago, it was very commonplace to have parents come in and tell me, our doc kept saying, well, he'll grow out of it.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Sure. Okay. Probably just normal development. Relax. Well, you don't want to overstress parents, but if there are certain critical things you're seeing in the first 1.5 years of life, you really do need to be getting in to see someone who is a specialist in this area and who can help you sort out whether or not there's something going on.
I think that's one of the biggest, misunderstandings in our society is we assume that the medical community has a very good idea of disability, what disability is, what it isn't, developmental disabilities. We assume a doctor understands what developmental disabilities are in general, what autism means, what mental retardation might be, and really that's a misnomer, is it not?
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that and I'm sure this is absolutely as true in behavior analysis, which is my field as a psychologist, as it is in any other area of care, that you have research that's current, that is always pushing the cutting edge of what we know.
Sure.
And then you have transition or translational work from the research into state-of-the-art practice and getting practitioners who are your leaders at the medical school that are involved in doing the research, having them, they adopt methods more quickly as they come into place, and you have professional guidelines and standards, and then you have the task of getting those consistently implemented. And of course, the person that sees a kid with autism first is likely not to be a specialist in this area, but is likely to be a generalist who's watching many, 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 many areas. Now,
your pediatrician.
And your American Academy of Pediatrics has put forward some guidelines for physicians on diagnosis and intervention that are extremely helpful. And so we draw from those resources in terms of some of the training that we do. But it's also important that local practitioners have a program that they can come and observe where they can actually see what we're talking about.
Sure.
In addition to just, coming to lectures or being approached from the standard formats of training. And so I think you can always expect that there's a little bit of time distance between when research shows what we should be doing and when things are implemented in the field, and then there's always inconsistency. So,
of course,
I think that the goal here is to just recognize that the early years of development are so precious that you really have to push the envelope. You really have to do everything you can to try to get the level of awareness up to the point where kids are getting screened and brought in routinely, and the guidelines are being followed, and then we have local community practitioners. And again, we work with psychologists. We have for example, on our board, we have a neuropsychologist who's just joined the professional community, who's wonderful and who's going to be an additional resource. And there are we're building infrastructure in the Columbus area. And so I think that and we have a number, actually, of psychologists and neuropsychologists in the area who are sophisticated about autism. So one of the roles we serve is being able to just encourage those kinds of referrals. And then as we hear about things through our support group, to also make sure that families are getting leads on where to go to get information and get the services they need. So.
I see. Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So that's what the HOPE does. Are there other communities that have programs similar to HOPE that you know of?
Well, there are certainly the Easter Seals has a program for kids with autism that is a little different than ours. It meets a little different need. And they provide speech therapy services and OT and PT, which is very complementary to what we do.
What you do.
Sort of not the same sort of focus, but very important. And then there are some other programs in the area. Certainly the schools provide services for children with autism. One of the things that we're most interested in doing is sort of through our preschool and through our training, providing research-based practice, modeling that, demonstrating that, and encouraging that. So that's one of the things that I think we kind of specialize in. Although certainly other agencies, I believe, try to do that as well. And we also have a social skills training program for adolescents and young adults.
And we want to talk about that later on, because I want to hear more of that.
And we also work with parents to try to equip them to be more effective advocates for their kids in the IEP process. IEP stands for Individualized Educational Plan. Of course, every child with autism should have an IEP through their school system that is aimed at tailoring the education that they receive to actually meet their needs. And so that we work with parents in terms of their role in that process.
And I think that's an important thing to highlight. What I like about, from what I've seen from the HOPE Autism Center, is the focus on the family. I mean, that's just good early intervention service right there. It's not just a focus on a child, but it's a focus on the child's support system, the stakeholders, most importantly, the family.
Well, and I think that is one of the core pieces of our mission.
Okay.
If there's anything that kind of differentiates us, it's that we're an organization, Muskogee County Autism Support Group, is a group that was founded by parents.
Okay.
That is, most of the people on our board are parents, although certainly we have folks in there in dual roles and in some other roles. But the most of our work is really family-centric. We're really interested in promoting the resources that are available to a family with a child on the spectrum, because it truly is, I think, Hillary Clinton wrote a book entitled "It Takes a Village to Raise a Child."
Right,
Absolutely.
right. I
And
remember.
years ago, I had a mom tell me that it seems like, when you have a kid with autism, the village disappears.
Yeah.
And so what
makes
we're
sense, yeah.
about, if you want to really think about our mission, is to counter that.
That's right.
Sure.
And to counter that with research-based practice, but to counter that in a family-friendly way.
Sure.
And that really is sort of something I think that is unique about our organization.
Okay.
I'm excited
Okay.
to be part of it.
Good. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the history. How did the center come to be? You mentioned parents, but was anyone really instrumental in putting this together?
Well, I think Lisa Jenkins was one of the founding parents who had a tremendous role in getting the organization started.
Okay.
And there are a number of other parents who've been involved. Physician Ray Trenka.
Right.
Diane Pope, who is our current executive director, has been involved in forming the organization. So we've got a core group of people that are involved and on our board, who are just wonderful assets. And it was from a group of those folks and the interest that they had, and really the lack of services.
And I remember being contacted by Lisa Jenkins and by her mother.
Yes.
And her mother was the one that really pushed me to be involved.
Absolutely.
And I think she was a
should say
major
it was
driver.
Lisa and her
grandmothers
mother.
of children
Yes,
with autism.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
she was a big part of that.
Yes.
So what exactly is your role then?
Well,
Muskogee County-
I'm actually the director of programs, which means that my role is to try to help build the programs that are available through the organization.
Okay.
And so, I'm the director of programs for both, the Autism Hope Center and the Muskogee Autism Support Group.
Okay.
And so I try to help the Autism Hope Center develop programs that meet research-based practices and that meet identified needs, and that we can make viable. There's a huge need a huge difference between a need and a market.
Okay.
You can have a program when you found a way to pay for the services and you found a way to deliver them that meets that need.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so some of the task before us is how to identify ways that we can build our capacity in ways that are financially affordable.
Which is everything. You got to be able
Which
to
is
stay
a
in
struggle.
business. If you can't,
Which is a struggle.
Well, I think this is a good place to take a break. And I would like to remind you that you're watching the Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. We are back at Education Forum, and our topic today is the Autism Hope Center, a conversation with Dr. Robert Babcock. And before we took the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the services provided by the Autism Hope Center, and I was hoping that Bob could talk a little bit more about what we mean by research-based practices. You've used that term a few times, so can you explain that?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that has really made the most difference in terms of the lives with kids with autism is that we have a technology, and there's a little bit of misuse of the terms applied behavior analysis in the autism community that I'll need to speak to. But
Please do. Yeah.
We have a technology that is known as applied behavior analysis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that in truth is a very broad set of skills that are research-based.
Okay.
That come out of the application of what we understand about how learning works to the behavioral needs and challenges that are presented by children with autism and their developmental needs, their educational needs. Now, the first journal of the first volume of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, which is a research-based applied journal for practitioners and research, was published in 1968.
Okay.
And in that journal, the definition of applied behavior analysis was the application of learning-based techniques to analyze and understand and change behavior in ways that were focused on the real problems people face, that were accountable. That is, they're data-driven. It's not that we just do things because we would like to do them.
Didn't pull them out of your ear,
or make them up in our kitchen.
As we're going. Yeah.
That are systematic, that is, that are related to what we know about the way learning works from lab experiments that have been done where you can precisely study learning. Well, that's the application of those ideas and principles that are always improving and changing to real-world situations. And so today, 2010, we have 40-some years of technology that has been very systematically developed. That is highly effective and very practical, and that really forms the basis for what works best in terms of addressing the needs that kids with autism present in terms of their educational and social development needs, which is really the core of autism. I mean, if you think about what autism is, well, fundamentally it's a deficit in social intuition, and it's a deficit in communication, social communication, that begins very early on in life, and as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. If your developmental time course is altered by neurological events that occur before birth or very, very early in life, and you get behind socially, and you get behind in your communication skills, and you get behind in terms of your range of interest of activities, and those are all the core features of autism, then interventions that can change that can help you to expand your skills, that can help you to become more competent in the social tasks of development, get you back on the normal developmental timeline. So in many ways, the idea is to prevent disability by getting in early and being strategic about identifying what needs the child has and addressing them with the best technology we have available. And that's really, I think, a good description of what applied behavior analysis really is about. Now, there is a use of the term ABA, which refers to discrete trial training, the work of Lovaas.
That's where we were going to go.
You're probably going to be asking me about that.
Okay.
And interestingly, Lovaas' study, which is the first to demonstrate efficacy in autism, was through a particular set of techniques within the area of applied behavior analysis. And it was done, the first study was done back in 1968 as well. And the technology that has grown up through the discrete trial training approach to early intervention is a part of that larger ABA technology. But there are a whole lot of other parts of it and a whole lot of different ways of looking at intervention. For example, incidental teaching done in inclusion-based settings is the Emory, the Walden program that Gail McGee has developed. which is a wonderful program and very, very effective.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and it doesn't use discrete trial training at all. It uses a completely different way of intervening. All of the things that fall within the broader area of applied behavior analysis are data-based, they're systematic, they're effective, and they're done quite precisely.
Okay.
But they're not all just ABA LOVAS, discrete trial training.
All right. There's a lot more to it.
There's a lot more to it than that.
Yes.
And I think lots of ways of looking at this. I think we ought to look at the kid and decide what it is the child benefits from most. Probably some of the most elegant research that's gone on in this area is Laura Schreibman's group in California has looked at the area of the technology, the packaging of technology term pivotal response training.
Okay.
Which is it's a format for providing intervention that is different from the old discrete trial training or even the new discrete trial training approaches.
Which is very popular now.
Very popular. And pivotal response training, like all methods of intervention in autism, it doesn't affect all of the kids the same way. We aren't able to reach every child. In fact, the best numbers are you get around 50% of the kids responding to your programs in ways that are just outrageously successful.
Okay.
And then you have everybody responds, but not to the same degree. And so you can differentiate kids that are responders from kids that are non-responders. And what Schreibman and her group did was they actually went back through videos of the children after they had intervened, and they went back and looked at characteristics of the child at the time before intervention had begun.
Okay.
And she came up with some behavioral profiles that would predict whether a child would be a responder to their intervention or not.
Okay.
And then with Schreibman and Shearer did a study, it was published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology, where they then used those profiles to predict who coming in the door then would respond. And they found that they could predict responders to pivotal response training and differentiate them before they began the training.
Beautiful.
And so then the question becomes, well, how can you use other methods, so discrete trial training or some other methods within, again, the larger set of techniques we have to try to prepare the children to be more effective in pivotal response training or to meet their needs in other ways.
Excellent.
And I think that's how we're going to, that kind of thinking is what it's going to take to push back that 50% rate of efficacy to the point where we're hitting kids, which is exactly what we need to be doing.
Yes.
And so I think the focus is on, well, how does this child, how do their needs suggest, how do their pre-intervention behavioral profiles suggest that they would respond to what? And then we ought to be building our interventions around those needs. It should be focused on what the kid needs rather than focusing it on, well, I like this brand, or I like that brand, or I do this, or I do that.
Right. So are schools using research-based practices?
Well, that's a fascinating question. I think the best answer I can give you in a nutshell is more.
More than
and that
before?
Is to say,
okay.
yes.
Okay. All right.
One of the things, and there are many parts of No Child Left Behind as a law that I think have, in some ways, interfered with kids with autism getting the same level of focus that they might otherwise get.
Okay.
The testing, the pressure to have schools avoid being in need of improvement really kind of channels kids into having, if there's any potential that your education can get you to pass those tests, that can sometimes be more of a focus than it ought to be. And that's a downside, in my view, of the interface between the IEP process and No Child Left Behind.
Okay.
However, with that said, one of the best things about No Child Left Behind is it firmly established that schools are required to provide research-based intervention in pre-instructional areas.
Okay.
Now, if you go back to an IDEA, as a law, is what creates the eligibility for special education. And if you go back to IDEA 97, which was the authorization before 2004, before No Child Left Behind, The requirements under IDEA 97 were that the child receive the services that were mandated in the IEP as reflected in the objectives. And so the presumption there was that what went on in the classroom was the purview of the teacher.
Yes.
The teacher was the professional. And if the teacher decided, well, okay, I have an objective that says we will teach this skill to this extent,
Sure.
then it was the teacher's decision about what methodology would be used.
Whatever
And the
she
whole
wanted.
notion of highly qualified teachers and research-based instruction was not out there on the
No, it
landscape
wasn't
at the
an issue
national
at
level.
all. No, no. Mm-mm.
Well, what changed with No Child Left Behind and the requirement that all education be research-based is that parents can now, at the IEP meeting, say to the school, show me the research
Okay.
that suggests that what you're proposing to do with my
This
child
works, yeah.
is going to work.
Absolutely.
Or at least has
Absolutely.
been shown to be effective with some kids similar to my kid. And that has raised the bar tremendously.
Excellent. Excellent.
You know, it's ironic if you know you or I were to go out on the highway and to drive in an irresponsible way or in a way that wasn't competent, there would be an enforcement system to monitor that.
Yes,
Where the
yes.
public would, you know, through the police and the courts and the prosecuting attorney, have a role in changing our behavior.
Yes, indeed. We should.
Now, if you're a parent with a child with autism, and the law, and IDEA is a law. There's no less a law
it's
than
not a good
thou shalt
idea.
not
It's the
speak.
law. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, if the school isn't following the law, unfortunately, it falls to the parents to enforce IDEA through the due process
Yes.
administrative law venue, rather than having an independent agency that can come in and objectively take a look at this and enforce it.
Right. We put it on the parents.
And so it's very important that parents have leverage and that they have the knowledge that that they need to be able to question decisions that are being made in the classroom about what's going on with their child. And I don't mean that in an adversarial sense. I don't mean that parents with autism do well by, you know, getting into adversarial relationships with schools. But they have a legitimate advocacy role in the process.
They do.
They are a huge part of the team. And one of the things
They don't always understand that, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that parents now have with IDEA 2004 is they have a requirement that's built into No Child Left Behind that, in fact, the school be providing research-based instruction that focuses on the needs of their child. And in a way that gives you the questions to ask, and it gives you the potential to be able to guide that process in a much more effective way.
Sure.
Now, the National Autism Center has just recently, within this last year, promulgated a set of standards. And it's very interesting what they did to develop those standards. They did much the same thing that pediatricians and cardiologists and hospitals do when they look at different treatment options.
Okay.
They got together a group of experts who reviewed the existing empirical literature and rated the support for different treatments and different interventions according to their levels of shown effectiveness.
Okay.
Sure.
So the established treatments now, there are a list of treatments that have been recognized as based on controlled research.
Beautiful.
There's a solid basis for believing that these things work.
Okay.
Now, the national standards suggest that what you do is you pick first from among those if they meet the need the child has.
Well, sure.
And you obviously take data on whether they're working for the child, and you obviously evaluate, because there are many, many situations where you're going to tweak the treatment, and that's part of the methodology is ongoing observation of whether what you're doing is working, and if so, what do you do next? And if not, what do you do next? How do you constantly change your
Always
intervention?
assessing that.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So that's part of the model. But we start with an understanding that this list of treatments and interventions is established practice.
Well, let me ask you this. Is there a practice currently in use that's not research-based that is ineffective?
Well, let me
that, in your opinion, isn't supported.
Well, let me
perhaps.
give you a little more about these standards, because I think
Okay.
I can answer that
Okay.
by saying that there's another group of practices that are not yet established practices,
Okay.
but that are recognized as being emerging practices.
Oh, all right.
Now, these are
Okay.
practices where there's good research,
Okay.
just not enough of it.
Not enough.
Okay.
It suggests that, yeah, you ought to be doing more of this. But we also need to continue researching it. So as you implement practices that are emerging, you recognize that they're not first line, they're maybe second line.
All right.
Okay?
Of that list.
Of that list.
Okay.
And it may be that there isn't an established practice that meets the needs you're trying to address, so you go immediately to an emerging practice.
Okay.
But again, there's research supporting that these are probably going to be found with further study to be established. And,
All right.
and again, you evaluate for your consumer whether they're working.
Sure.
Then you have
Sure.
two other categories. You have the harmful treatments,
Okay.
and you have the treatments that are not established at all by research. Okay?
Are we using
We are
those
not,
currently in the schools?
Well, there were no treatments that were identified under the national standards practice being harmful,
Oh,
fortunately.
okay.
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 But there are a number of treatments that are not established.
Okay.
And I would say sensory integration is probably the most popular
That was the
of the
question.
non-established treatments. Yes, I know.
That
I'm
was
getting
the-
around to that.
that's where I
But I
wanna
want
go.
to provide you context so you'll know that I'm not like just anti-sensory integration because I don't like it.
No,
Okay?
I did.
If you go back and look at, I started working with kids with autism in 1970 and 1971
Okay.
as a volunteer when I was an undergraduate at Farallon Treatment Center, which was a part of Pontiac State Hospital in Michigan. And we were rolling kids around in boxes. We'd read some of Jane Harris's work on sensory integration.
Right.
And that whole methodology is based on a notion about development, which is both Piagetian and which is based in the very old concept that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now, what that I know what those words mean is that the development of the individual is parallel to the evolution of the species following Aristotle's
Okay.
natural selection.
Okay.
Okay. Well, first of all, if you're into paleontology at all, you know that the evolution isn't a scale; it's a tree. Okay.
That's right.
And secondly, if you're into developmental psychology, you recognize that Piaget's model of development is a wonderful model for Piaget's kids and for many European children, but that it doesn't apply to everybody. And
No,
Vygotsky's research, the Russian psychologist who looked at the impact of environments and cultures on development, found that the path of development follows the interaction path of the culture.
Okay.
Right.
And so there are lots of different ways
Things
of
going
developing. And that's important to recognize because the sensory integration model assumes that development goes in a lockstep fashion.
yes,
And if you
yes.
miss steps, you
gotta
got to
go
go back
back
in,
and do it.
you got to
Yes.
fill in,
Okay.
and you got to address those. So we need to get our sensory stuff together and integrate it before we can
we're
go
ready
on to learn higher level conceptual skills, which is total nonsense. Okay? There's no solid empirical support for that.
Sure.
In fact, there are only 4 studies that have been identified as adequate methodological quality in a review of the research by Gwendolyn Dawson on sensory integration to ask the question of whether it works. Half of the time they see maybe it does, half the time they see maybe it doesn't. Why, we're not sure.
Okay.
It's probably other things that are going on. We can talk more about that. I know we've got a break coming up.
We got a break
so-
coming up. This is a good place to take a break. I want to remind you, you're watching Education Forum, and I'm Jeff Conklin.
Say that we
We're back on Education Forum. I'm Jeff Conklin. Today we're having a conversation with Dr. Robert Babcock, who is the program director for the Muskogee County Autism Support Group. And today we're talking about some of the services provided by the Autism Hope Center as well as the Muskogee County Autism Support Group. So, Bob, can you give us a little bit of information about some of the support services you offer, especially for older kids, adolescents with autism?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we try to figure out what the needs are by having a monthly parents and interested persons in the community, and by doing our trainings at those meetings, but also trying to get an ongoing sense of, well, what are the needs out there. And one thing we came up with that was very much needed this year is under the category of social support as well as a skills-based program for adolescents and adults. And so we put together our first 8-week training series or program that just ended last week. And the feedback we got from it was, so when's the next one, guys? Which is feedback we like to hear. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, that is.
Absolutely.
And our first group had folks as young as 14 in it, and folks as old as into 18 and 19. And I think it's important that as we build additional groups, we're going to, I think, try to get more age-focused, so maybe younger folks and older folks, because the issues that people are interested in do differ a little bit. But let me tell you about the model for the first group.
Okay, please.
To begin with, we conceptualized the meetings of the support group as something that we wanted to staff with a board-certified behavior analyst running the group. But we also felt it important that it be a co-op program. And our goals here were really twofold. One, frankly, was to keep the cost down.
Of course.
In order to make this something that's affordable for parents, what you want to do is minimize the personnel costs. So we... and for that reason, but for a second reason, which is to use this as a training opportunity, we developed the group as a co-op model. And basically what that meant was that we met with all of the parents of the participants before the first meeting and provided them with some hands-on training in how to work with kids who are having problem behaviors that come up in group settings. And we base that training on some wonderful technology that comes out of University of Florida working with the foster care system all across the state of Florida. And they've developed a package of parent training. It's called Tools of Choice. And the components of that program are you teach folks how to focus on positive skills. You teach parents how to scan for what the kid is doing correctly, how to establish themselves as a reinforcer, and how to use reinforcement to try to nurture and support appropriate behavior. And then as minor problem behaviors occur, the first strategy is plan to ignore it. You don't respond to them. And instead you try to just catch the kid who was just acting up a moment ago doing the appropriate thing and reinforce that as a way of kind of shifting the behavior. But you probably have all heard of the advice, well, ignore it and it'll go away. Well, of course, that doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you need a little bit more than just ignoring it, and you need a little bit more than even paying attention to the appropriate alternative behavior. You also need some strategies for what to do when a problem behavior comes up. And so a very nice strategy that that's in this program is called pivot praise. It actually goes back to the Bobodell studies of Bandura. You're old. You probably remember along with me a day when we were worried about violence on TV and whether kids would imitate that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Well, Bandura did a whole series of studies where he focused on what's the impact of observing behavior and observing the consequences of that. And what he found out was that if a child watches a scenario where they watch this on TV, another kid is beating up an inflatable doll, and there's no reinforcement, there's no praise, there's no outcome of that's positive, the child is much less likely to imitate that behavior than if they see the same thing happen, only the experimenter walks in and says, oh, that was a good right hook. Hey, hit him again.
Nice job. Yeah.
Okay, you do that, and now you're going to have the kid imitating the behavior that they see on the video.
Yes.
So we use that strategy when a kid is acting up. What we do is, rather than fussing at the kid who's acting up, which, by the way, is a great way to reinforce that problem behavior,
Absolutely, yes.
what you do is you turn to the kid sitting next to them and catch an incompatible behavior the child is doing
That's
praise.
appropriate. And praise
That's
it.
appropriate.
Yes.
And so, rather than telling the child who's acting up what to do, you give them an immediate model of what to do by praising an alternative behavior, and that uses Bandura's concept
Right along
of
with it. Yes.
social learning theory. By praising appropriate behavior in the presence of the bad behavior, you show the kid a model.
Sure.
And you set it up so the kid's likely to imitate it. And then the second that the child who's having a minor problem stops, you catch whatever they're doing correctly, and you start
Get
praising
right on
it again.
You bet.
And what you do if you do that over time is you not only teach kids good behavior by observing what gets reinforced, but you teach them to learn by observing good behavior.
Yes.
Right.
So they're learning to learn.
Learning
which
to
is
learn. So
Harry
in the
Harlow's
future,
concept.
oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
Huge stuff here. So if you can get kids to learn how to learn social skills with praising appropriate behavior, that's a very, very effective way of setting kids up to do the right thing.
Sure.
Right.
And then following that up with reinforcement. So that pivot praise is a very powerful technique. So we train our parents in how to use the first set of techniques, attend and ignore, and then also how, when problems started to happen, how to use pivot praise to manage minor problem behaviors.
Okay.
And then we also set up a third rule, which is that if things get really wild, let us handle it. And our approach when that happens, by the way, is not to correct a behavior, not to focus on the problem, but to simply very directly ask the child who's acting up to come do something else. And then if they cooperate, to praise them, and if they don't, to kind of guide them out of the room, and then ask them, so why did I ask you to leave? Let them think about it, and then reinforce calmness as soon as it occurs, and then ask them if they're ready to go back in.
Okay.
So those are the basic parent management
Right.
child management strategies we taught the parents.
Sure.
And we use those in the group, and then we have parents coming in as co-op leaders, rotating through the group, so they got an opportunity to practice those skills with us kind of guiding
Guiding them
that.
as well.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
they were to do it with not only their child in the group, but with other kids in the group, so
Sure.
they got the opportunity to get comfortable with it. And so that was a very important part of our, well, we thought that was an important thing to be doing.
But before you get off that real quick, so do you see in this last program you did, do you see growth in terms of your parents in that respect?
We did. Now, one of the downsides, and here I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, is we didn't set up the evaluation of the skills, of the mastery of those skills by the parents as well as we would like to. And one of the things we're going to be looking for is some grant funding to try to get the additional resources to be what you've got to do in order to evaluate those skills and their actual uses. You've got to video the groups and then go back and analyze the skill levels before and after. And there's a certain amount of additional cost to that we were not able to do in our first group. And so our evaluation of the first group is simply based on consumer satisfaction.
Okay.
Our next step, however, is going, and I felt comfortable with that, although it's not strictly what applied behavior analysis analysts would do. I felt comfortable with that because this is a program that's been used so widely across the state of Florida. The Tools of Choice program has been used so extensively that I thought we were pulling pretty standard technology there and applying it. Subjectively, we feel like we got the parents doing it pretty well, and we got pretty good results. The next step, though, is to be able to video, observe, and come up with some quantification to see, is this really working the way we intended to, and what are the skills our parents mastering? And I think we need to look at that as part of the development of this of our method. So we are a little weak there.
Right. But I can certainly see that as a great opportunity, another one of opportunity where you can partner with local universities.
Well, I was wondering about that. Greg, I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
You got any students who would
we'll
be
talk later.
interested in
We'll
doing
talk
some
later.
research here? Because I think that this would be a wonderful master's thesis. You know,
absolutely.
we could
Go
get
that
some
direction,
students
yeah.
in there to do the observation and the quantification. You know, there might be something.
There
Yeah,
might
we'll
be a
talk
place
later.
there.
Let's
Yeah,
talk
we
about
should,
that
we
after
should.
the
Yeah,
cameras
there you
are
go,
off.
there
Okay.
you go.
So, great question.
So, how many kids are involved in your group?
Okay, well, we had eight children involved
Okay.
in the support group. We had 4 kids at a time with autism involved in our preschool program, as well as between 2 and 4 typical children, depending on at what point we're at in their preschool. We also have, in terms of the support groups, we're involved with families that are much larger in number. And I think the number's somewhere in the 40s at any given time in terms of people that have been actively participating in, not at every meeting, but at
Sure.
various meetings, where we're reaching a larger number of kids that way.
How do just real quick? How do families get involved? People that might be watching
Right.
this.
Well, we
how
have
do they
a
get involved in-
webpage, which is mcasg.net.
Okay.
And if you will, turn your favorite browser to that, you can pull up our webpage, and the information that you need is right there, and you can see the phone number is 706-604-6333. And so there's information available either through the internet or by phone.
Okay.
Contact us, call us.
Great,
Look
great.
at what's on the webpage. And Diane Pope, who is the president of the organization, is very active in terms of fielding those questions.
Okay.
And we are very interested in expanding what we do to try to meet unmet needs that we can get to. And so if there's something that, if you're in the Chattahoochee Valley and you're a family member of a person on the spectrum and there's an unmet need you're wrestling with, let us know.
Okay. Okay.
And we try to pull together programs that can begin to address those.
Now, you're currently operating a classroom.
We are currently operating a classroom program that also includes pull-out time. And it's really 2 settings we operate in,
Okay.
as well as our playground. Columbus Tech has been, Technical College has been very generous with us in providing a space for us to have the Autism Hope Center. And we use that space for our social groups. We use that space for our board meetings. We use that space for our preschool program and for a lot of the training we do for professionals. We also do training down at St. Luke's Church down in downtown on a monthly basis. And we also have a space over at the Brackley Center where we're set up for individual meetings with
Wonderful.
families.
Okay.
So we have enough space to be doing things that occur across both the time of the day and that address different needs.
Okay. So how many children did you serve in your classroom last year?
Well, we served a total of 5 kids with autism in our preschool program.
Okay.
And we served 8 folks through our social skills training program. But we also addressed a number of issues for families through our support meetings. And I can't give you a specific number there.
Well, no,
because
probably
Sure,
not, because
sure.
they come and
Yeah.
go. And do you also accept children that do not have autism into your classroom?
Well, a part of our program, and this is something that we think is hugely important for typical peers, is we try to have at least, we're aiming for an equal number of kids who are not on the spectrum, who are typically developing
That's
and with
right,
the kids
that's
with
right,
autism.
yeah.
And, sometimes we get a reaction from parents like, well, I don't know if I want to let my kid catch autism. Like, which
I don't want them to
silly.
catch
You
autism.
can't do that.
Right.
But one of the things that I think we offer for our typical peers is a small group setting, a teacher for 1 to 4 ratio with a highly skilled teacher.
Sure.
And what we're helping the kids who are typical kids do is to not only develop their own skills, but to learn to be leaders by teaching kids with autism. We set them up to be leaders. And so if you've got a child who is developing typically, who would benefit from the challenge of mentoring another child their age, we're very supportive of that. And I think, if you think about how we all got to be educators and psychologists and got into, leadership positions in the helping professions, I think you can look back at your own development and probably find relationships that you've had with people where you were a mentor.
Oh, yeah.
And if you think about the real value of that in your own life, I mean, I know that's why I'm here.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
And so what we're trying to do for our typical peers is to provide the opportunity to develop those mentoring skills and to do it in a safe and nurturing environment with enough attention and enough assistance so that they can succeed at it and feel very good about it and have a great time. And it's also preschool, so it's got to be a whole lot of fun. And we work fun real well.
Good.
I mean, I'm not the guy that does the hands-on stuff with preschool. Too boring for that. We have we have people who do fun really well, and
nobody wants a psychologist doing that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness, no.
Well,
I'm way too boring.
I'm going to have to cut you off here, Bob, because I think we've run out of time.
Well, I really appreciated you asking me to come and chat with you guys
and I wanted
today.
to say,
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for coming on and talking about
the
Autism Hope Center and the Muskogee County Autism Support Group. I'd just like to remind everyone that this is the Education Forum, and I want to say we've had a great season, Greg. We've had a good year. This will be our last show for this academic year, and also for this season. We're going on hiatus for the summer. We'll be back in August with some new shows, some new ideas, some new guests, and hopefully we'll get Dr. Bob back on, maybe in the fall. And the other thing I want to mention is that all of our shows are available on demand at the coehp.tv website, and we're also, every show is available as an iTunes as well. So people are able to watch us. They can use our resources.
So when you download the Beatles, you can also download
the Education Forum. So I guess that's it. And I just also want to mention one more thing, and I want to say goodbye to Justin Bakuti, who has gone on to bigger and better things in the world of counseling. I'm Jeff Conklin, and thank you for watching the Education Forum.